With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. All right, welcome friends and allies to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and if you're getting to see this, you're actually seeing from footage, but if you're listening to this, you're going to hear a voice that you've known, Greg Sailors, but he's not my usual co-host, SJ. Right. Greg Sailors is co-hosting.
Good to be here today.
Big seat to fill.
No doubt. So SJ's the man, no doubt.
Yeah, so if this is in any way, shape, or form less than what we normally do, then you can blame SJ because he's not here. But there's a reason why Greg's here, and I'm here today on Exploring More podcast, is we have the privilege of talking to our friend Morgan Snyder from Ransomed and Becoming Good Soil. He wrote a book called Becoming a King, and I'm excited to talk to you about this today. I think it's important. I'm proud of you. I know what it can be to take on this book writing task. I want to talk about that, how that experience was for you. But welcome, Morgan. Welcome to Exploring More podcast. Glad to have you.
Thanks. Here. Thanks so much, Michael. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I've done a lot of podcasts, but it is great to be with friends, like just seeing your faces and thinking over the years of relationship. Like we were all younger men when this message found our hearts. We have traveled over years, over a decade of being entrusted to steward this piece that's expressed in Exploring More, expressed in Zoweh, expressed in Wild at Heart and Become Good Soil. So it's just a privilege to be with you guys. I'm really excited to see where God takes us today.
Yeah, us too. I was thinking about even in the formal introduction, I had this vision because there's some things in Morgan's profile. I'm just going to read a few of these, Morgan, about the author. Morgan Snyder is a strategist, entrepreneur, teacher, writer, and speaker. His passion is to both be shaped by and shape the men and women who are shaping the kingdom of God. There's a little more, but I thought about, how there's these degree programs, right? You just don't become a teacher. I mean, there's people who try to do that,
right? But
then there's people who go through, like you said, a decade, 15 years of training, and they get these degrees. Sometimes they're recognized by others, and they get these honorary degrees. So I thought about Morgan. I thought he's gotten these degrees. I've seen him. I've seen him at work, and I've seen him paying the price and learning, falling, getting up, and moving forward is the best way to describe like the wisdom that's hard earned in becoming a strategist.
Yes.
Right. You don't get everything right.
Well, I think it's interesting as you share those words because I think gifting and talents is a double-edged sword. And so often we can take God in us, literally, what we've been entrusted with as gifting, but we've not matured. We've not become wholehearted. We've not become the kind of person that can wield that sort of power. And like we know from Mask of Zorro, we fight bravely and we die quickly. And we're talking to a lot of people on this podcast that I know are wanting their whole heart back. They want to take the journey of the steady discipleship, the steady apprenticeship to become wholehearted and be able to offer the life of God to the world. And I'm struck by this idea that I learned at the seat of so many mentors that we have to come to know who we are apart from our gifting so that our gifting can be free in the service of love. Because if we don't know who we are, our core identity as God's son and God's daughter, our gifting in some ways is enslaving, that we constantly use it to answer our need for validation. And so when you share that, I think what I'm struck by is I had the privilege of 2 decades of asking questions, of doing the slow and steady, of excavating where we're really baited to build and uprooting, dismantling in order to become. And so I've really learned that the gifting is a precarious set of resources. And most of us have more gifting than we have maturity. And it's something worth giving consideration to.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Think about serving that gifting rather than being settled and letting the outflow of that settledness and love with God promote whatever that gifting is, rather than you serving it because I'm getting all the attaboys and the things that are, feel good, but really aren't true. They're false.
Yeah. Some years ago, Morgan, I realized I needed to carry some scissors or a good knife to just cut the strings that I might attach to the gifting. The old way is I'll do this and you'll do something back.
Right.
I'll do this and you'll give me an encouragement or a compliment. And just to get free of that. And then just to watch for the enemy's work, trying to put lines to it and trying to put strings attached. It's very easy to fall to. But I remember coming awake to doing that, being guilty of that. And I was like, this is not good.
Yes.
These are ulterior motives. This is not
right.
good,
Right. And the world rewards that. As men, we get pleasantly rewarded for our gifting. And the problem is it's often under uninitiated kings. Yeah. And so you have people in roles of power and influence that the boy in them is looking for people to build their kingdom. And as we mature, we actually become more aware of how many strings we have. Like you said, that gifting served you, in your younger years. And then you realize, it begins to exhaust us.
Then it enslaved.
That's right. Realize we're enslaved. Yeah, it's a good term, Greg, you used. Yeah, it's good to be still unfinished. We're all in process, but we're after the real thing. It's good to do it together.
Because this is, like you said, such history, we got to take a little bit of time just because when was the first time you saw and met Morgan? What's your history here?
2003, I was at my first boot camp there in Buena Vista. I was with Barry Strickland, and Barry introduced me to Morgan. Yeah, so that was meaningful. And because of Barry's knowing you guys in front of me, I got a little access with you guys that I felt privileged. I don't know. So I had the opportunity to meet all of the team over time. I'll never forget being with Bart and going up and saying hello to him, and Bart being Bart. He unbuckles his pants and puts his Carhartt shirt, tucks it in right there, and just is so comfortable with who he is, and I just love that about him and all of you guys.
Well, that's how they do it all on the streets of West Texas.
Exactly. I didn't know where you were going with that story.
Yeah, my eyes got a little big too.
We're safe. I'm wearing my Carhartt right now.
That's great.
Yeah, so that was the first time I met you, Morgan, 2003.
Yeah, mine was similar at boot camp and with Ransom Heart and around Wild at Heart. And I remember I felt like, looking back, I could say this, Morgan was the busiest, movingest guy at the whole camp. I mean, he was always coming in, out, moving, because he was basically operations in many ways, as I understood it.
Yeah, it was.
Morgan and a small team that was really making the environment great for several hundred men. And then I don't think I was maybe at the first one, but I showed up 06 or 07, and Morgan was on stage. Morgan was in one of the chairs. Morgan was sharing. And that's when I really got to know you, like so many men can, right? We may not have been close or friends. You gave people access to your life through boot camps. And it was really important to see and to hear what you were learning and the journey you were on. I don't know what year that was, but yeah, your role shifted, and then so did your place in my story.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and we were at so many of those early on, particularly. I remember from 2003 to probably 09 or 10, going to probably one a year, or, going to Advance. My wife being at Ransomed Femininity way back when that was around.
Robin was there too.
And just all of that and working on the cruise, and, you get 2-3 minutes. And then for me, the big turning point is when I was able to be with you at Bart's Ranch in 2010 at the Globe and Anchor.
Yes.
I so appreciated that invite, and it's been life-changing for me, honestly, in so many ways. Not just what happened there, but the relationships that formed, the other good kings that now I had a chance to journey with those men, John Dell particularly, and Aaron and a few others. But it's been so good.
Yeah, it's amazing to think back because, those early days where all of us were trying to recover who's God really? Like, what is the story in which we're in? Who am I as a man And then individually, uniquely, what has God said in my heart? And what is my frontier? Like, what is the edge of my initiation into wholeheartedness? And I think all those years, you guys, of Greg, you were at the first Become Good Soil Intensive. That was it, 2010. Like, this is where the message of becoming a king was birthed after sitting at many elders, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that was our first swing. It was a dozen of us under the care of 2 elders, and it's grown over a decade. We had the celebration at my fire pit. You were on Zoom, but most guys were able to be there at my house on June 3rd. It was exactly a decade after I gave the challenge to you and to me, to all of us, to say, what if? What if we gave a decade to let it be character over building our own kingdom, to excavate over building, to take the low seat, to allow the slow and steady process of becoming wholehearted to be the centerpiece of our life in God? And we went for it. And we sat around a fire with a dozen guys, and we got to tell the stories. Here we are a decade later, and now there's some 460 alumni. And Michael had the privilege of, I had the privilege of having him as a Become Good Soil facilitator, one of the elders. And we've logged a lot of miles together. And our passion at Wild at Heart and Become Good Soil is to invest everything we have in men like you that are entrusted with realms, entrusted with regions, entrusted with organizations that we'll never touch directly or personally, but we want to shape those that are shaping God's kingdom and give more and more of us to fewer and fewer men to seed a revolution. Reach the many, find the few. Yeah, it's fun to listen, to look back. It's really good.
Yeah. And as Morgan was saying that, I remember being invited. I was just on the other side of 50.
You were the young buck, buddy. You were the
youngest facilitator, maybe at the time. Maybe some others have come, but probably 4 years ago. So I was just on the other side of 50. And yeah, I was like, this is, I think the beginning is the AARP card. This is the beginnings of the 25-cent coffee at McDonald's or something, man. I'm on the hill. I hadn't crested it, but I am on the hill of this age. And just being invited, I think both sides of what Becoming Good Soil does, and even the masculine journey, as we're going to get into a little bit deeply with your book. Yeah, having a place to be invited to, a circle, a conference retreat, a war room, a fire, and listen, and be a learner until it's maybe your turn to share or say what you're learning,
Right.
And what God's doing. So good on you. Well done, Morgan, for the environments that you have been a part of creating for the hearts of men and women and many others. So, hey, we're going to take a quick break. So we'll be right back with Morgan Snyder on the Exploring More podcast as we dive deeper into becoming a good king. We'll be right back.
The Zoweh team invites you to attend the Heart of a Warrior Encounter Weekend this fall at Young Life Trail West in Buena Vista, Colorado, Thursday to Sunday, October 15 to 18, 2020. During the weekend, the team has 3 main objectives: help a man to get his heart back, teach him how to fight, and show him where the battles are. The kingdom needs more men who know what it is to walk deeply with God and who dare to be dangerous for good. Join the Men of Zoweh by going to zoe.org/events for more information.
I'd love to just transition to the book. And first question, talk about the writing process. How many people have you heard in the last decade, hey, I'm thinking about writing a book?
Oh my goodness.
Right? Okay.
Right.
So anyway, talk a little bit about how the writing process shaped you and how you brought your heart to the writing process.
Yeah, I've known for a long time that one of my gifts is to be a messenger. And I've been curious, Michael, so how do I steward that? What is the form that it takes? And this invitation of Become Good Soil to the lower seat, to actually not allow my gifting to be the lead role in my life, but instead this question of what kind of person am I becoming? And how do I excavate? How do I become wholehearted? That set me on a trajectory. And so for years, out of my dreams, I knew that I was meant to lead, but I also felt the boy inside. I felt the uninitiated places. And I found this dissonance between my external life and my internal life. And there were things that weren't working. The season, it was young marriage, young career, young children. And I had a lot of pain. And I had this sense of just feeling behind, sense of feeling fear. And where I was led was asking God, like, what's the path? Like, what do I do with the pain? What do I do with the gifting? What do I do with the dreams? What's the most important thing? And it was from there I found myself under mentors where God said, I want to speak. I'm going to do it through the oldest men in your life. So find them, find your questions and bring your questions to them. And it was over 2 years' time, some 75 men where I sat with them, either through letters or a campfire, correspondence, over phone from other countries, and asked them those questions. And God began to recover a map, a sort of treasure map. And it was something newly recovered, something ancient. And I realized I was compelled to share it with others. And it took our friend Aaron, Greg, you mentioned him, where he said, Morgan, like, my friends are dying. I've got all these young kings, these leaders, and they're fighting bravely and dying quickly. And you are sitting on a treasure chest. Amen. You have to share it. And so it wasn't out of self-promotion. God made it impossible to no longer not share. And so I started small ways, 12 guys at a retreat, sitting in this treasure chest of counsel. And over time, I began blogs and podcasts purely as stewarding this kind of wisdom, of body of wisdom's content that I was curating and distilling. But in it, I found that I did have a gift to write. But it was interesting, Michael. God made it very clear through the counsel of something I read through Dallas Willard. He said, Morgan, first, I want you to become the kind of man that I can entrust with this message. And secondly, I want you to take the time to cultivate the message and curate it in a way that's accessible to people, that's fine-tuned, that will be impactful to them. And once that's done, I want you to then pray and find a partner that can bring that to the people that I want to bring it to. Because your task is to reach the many, to find the few. And that was formally a 6-year process where I was writing, but it was all in my secret places, 30 minutes here, an hour there. I was mostly becoming. It was mostly doing the work of excavation, doing the work of the lowest seat at the table. It was the hidden years. And in time, I began formally working on the manuscript, and it was just thousands of unseen hours, right? You know it. In a half-finished basement on a table that was 2 filing cabinets and an old door. I mean, it was very symbolic. The kids crying upstairs, they were infants, and working the task. I ended up with a 350,000 word manuscript.
Come on, man. I'm telling you.
Do you know this?
Yes. I know my version of that.
Exactly.
I know, absolutely. And the recycle bin, because, brother, it's not a trash bin, because there's things that you write, it doesn't necessarily fit, but it's not bad. And so it goes into this recycle bin. I mean, I would have hundreds of pages by the time Heart of a Warrior and Search and Rescue with the recycle bin, you know, and things that at that time, I guess I thought they were important. Why? What was that about? You know, so.
Right. It's brutal, the process, but it's like, you realize it's like chainsaw art. You start with these big tools and then you go to chisels and you're dialing it into what's helpful to other people, right? What's accessible, what's going to allow them to encounter God. And eventually it was a 55,000 word manuscript and editing process. And then it was, okay, God, what do I do? And it was just supernaturally led. I can't really mentor someone on writing a book because I don't really know anything other than my story. I walked with God. I took the next step. And then God provided a relationship with an agent, and then the publishing process, and then all of that. It was supernatural. It was brutal. It was holy. It was costly. And the economics of it, you know, it's got to be kingdom economics because the math doesn't match, right? At best, it's minimum wage work, but it's stewardship.
Yeah.
It's stewardship of what God's been entrusted to me, his timing, his way. And I would have never been able to time in 10 years of work that he would launch it in the middle of COVID, right? And so for the first 8 weeks, it was out. There were literally 0 sales at bookstores, physical bookstores, because they were closed. Like, what a bad idea.
That's right.
But then at the same time, the week after it launches, we have one of the greatest moments in U.S. modern history of a man in power mishandling his power of a police officer with a brutal situation of killing a man, and the world goes nuts. But it's nothing new. It's the same story that's in history books or on Google's news today. And so I believe God timed it. I believe it was God's message entrusted to my care to bring to the many, to recover the hearts of men. And so it's a holy and very unique process.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, Greg, amen to what Morgan was sharing. And anybody who asks me now, I say a couple things. Are you sure? Are you sure you really want to do that? Secondly, just write.
Yes.
Because any publisher, anybody, it has to be there for them to say, oh, I see something in there.
Yes.
So you have to write. And writing is learning how to write. And then the third thing I would say, how are you at self-editing? Because
you got to keep everything.
That is where the hours of labor and lifting
is.
And beautiful. There's just times, Morgan, you just know that's it.
Yes.
That's what I wanted to say.
And there are times you have to listen to someone else say, this is for later. This is for something else. Cut that. Right. And you just feel there has to be a benevolent attachment of really, this is God's, and God, I give you permission. And I think the biggest piece I've learned too in the process, it's helpful to people listening, is a lot of people write because they need to process their own story, their own journey. It's different to write for yourself than it is to write for others. And usually those are kind of steps in phases, but it's okay to write for what you need to get out, for what you need to process. But it's very different to then take that and say, how do I make this a gift to the larger community for their own sake?
Yeah, that's great. I never was more aware of even writing emails and text and things until after I had written the books. Then it's like, I want to try to express myself in this way as accurately and in a way that's kind and helpful.
Yes.
And editors, man, they can be your disciple. I remember the hardest, you seem like you're really trying to prove yourself. I was like, no, that's, he was right. I wasn't denying it. He was right. I don't want to be questioned.
It's exposing, right?
I don't want to be questioned by anybody. I'm like, okay, I'll come back in a couple of weeks. I got to go spend some time with God. That's a theme in my life.
Isn't there a settling in, though, that happens where you kind of give your heart over to the editing, at least for seasons, I would think, that you can receive it, settle into it. I mean, I think about that for myself. I mean, I love to write. I'm not writing a book or anything like that, but poems and all kinds of stuff. But Michael is a 1 on the Enneagram. So you're a reformer. You love to do that, and I get reformed from time to time, which is good. But in the beginning, you can take offense to certain things. Sure. But when you settle into that reforming, that editing process with people that you love and that you can trust, you can receive it better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know from a writing a book standpoint, I've talked to other friends that have written that it takes a little bit to settle in.
Yeah, it's different than a blog. It's different than an email because the flow, it's linear.
Yeah, it's true.
You feel like you're mixing a soup. And all these ingredients are going in at this as well. So it's a wonderful thing. And like you said, it's a challenging thing. You ready to talk a little bit more about the book?
Yeah, I've got one of the questions here. If we can lead in. It ties in, Morgan, with Michael's The Heart of a Warrior. And I'm leading a group. I haven't led a group in probably 5 years, a small group. And it's been so refreshing to do that and to take guys through orientation and dealing with the hearts and the whole wounds, vows, agreements, and false selves and things that I just haven't done in a one-on-one space in a group in some time. And so in Michael's book in chapter 3, and I thought this was apropos, with moving into talking about some of the things that we want to talk about with you, Morgan, is a verse.
There you go.
Passage, if you will.
Beautiful.
Page 36. And this is after Pilgrim's Progress. He quotes Pilgrim's Progress. And then he goes into saying the critical mile markers a masculine heart must encounter in becoming a true man lie along an ancient path. But it is a road less traveled, and such a road is often lost as one generation gives way to the next. Today, we need voices from the past to tell us about that ancient way. Voices of the pioneers, explorers, teachers who lived the journey and shared about it. And then there's more there about warnings and things that God is up to in those places. But, I think about that from your book. And as I was reviewing and looking back, I mean, in your introduction, you go into the ancient path quite a bit. John's kind of
Yes.
talking about it as well in his A Kind Word start out. And then there's one particular line in here. My intent is to serve as a curator, which you've been saying already, and distiller. Are you talking about spirits with that? No, it's another story. Ancient path.
It's for you to determine.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Of an ancient path to becoming a king. When I think about those two verses, those passages, the question here on one of the sheets that we have for you, few men, even Christians, rarely think of themselves as a king. What does it mean to become a king? Well, I think that one of the problems is people don't know the path to become a king. They've not had the John Eldridges or Barry Strickland's or Michael Thompson's and others to love them well and to help them find that ancient path. So I think when we think about ancient path and we think about what does it mean to become a king, I would ask you to just elaborate a little bit on that for us.
Yeah, those are big questions and big ideas, which are really worth exploring. I think to divide them up a bit, the ancient path, it's interesting. G.K. Chesterton, and I quote this in the book, he had this fascinating comment where he said, every generation loses the gospel, this path of life.
Yep.
And every generation is charged with its recovery. And I think it's really fascinating because I think of a pendulum that swings back and forth that, we miss it. Every generation gets a little wacky and gets off kilter, and then we recover it and that gets wacky. And the beauty of it is by everyone losing and recovering, the gospel stays the gospel, that Christ is at the center. It's the heroic Trinity, and it's constantly being brought back to what is true and good and beautiful. And so the question is, how do we recover that ancient path? And what I learned early in this process is it wasn't something new. The world loves new, right? It was something newly recovered. And I learned early, I want to be the kind of person that's never found stating something new. I wanted to always be something newly recovered. And when I went to God looking for the answers, I think it was very strategic that he led me to older men, because we do have to turn to the first generations. The culture we're in of the information age and worship of an idolatry of youth, we've lost wisdom's long view, and we don't appreciate process and understanding there is no substitute for miles on the odometer. And so it had to start with our elders, with people that have learned through the slow and steady. And then it went to guys like Tozier and MacDonald and Lewis and Buechner and men that have gone before us, Willard, and then to the ancient, the Jeremiah and Paul and Athanasius, and going into the early saints of recovering this path, the things that are universal to the human experience. We all want life, and we want it to last forever. And that's what we're after. But having said that, to your second idea, Greg, of what does it mean to become a king? And I think it's really important language, because we all have a kingdom. Every human being, men and women, kings and queens, we all have a realm entrusted to our care. It's where we have say. It's where what we want done is done. And so, we decided what we were going to wear today or what we were going to eat for breakfast. My kids left today for their first day of school, and my son is 16 and my daughter's 13. And for the first time in our life, they drove away from our home in his own vehicle together. It wasn't carpool. We've done carpool for 11 years. It's over. And Sherry and I sat in our driveway. We stood in our driveway. And at first we were just holding back tears. And then we broke up into this celebration. We're like, we did it. We did it. We made this milestone. Our kids are well. And I think what we were celebrating was our children's kingdom is expanding. My son now has a vehicle that he earned with landscaping money during COVID. And he bought it. We paid 50%. He paid 50%. He owned a vehicle before he even had his license. And it was a sober moment. It was a ceremony of passing the keys to him to say, son, this is an expanding of your kingdom. With this power, You can bring great good to the world, and you can bring harm. And I'm celebrating. You're on time for this. And there's room to make mistakes. There's room to fail. This is the safest place under this roof for you to fail. You have permission to fail here. And we'll figure this out together because we have a good father. But you're a good king. And you are in your initiation. And your kingdom is expanding. And you are on time. And so my question to our listeners is, how is your kingdom? How is the realm that's being entrusted to your care? It begins with your body and your mind and your thoughts, your imagination. Yeah. It expands to include people and things, people of responsibility that you're meant to steward their lives and their gifting, our finances, our work in the world, our homes. How is your kingdom? And most of us have too much kingdom and not enough character to steward it well. It's an upside down kingdom. And I'll finish my comment with this, that Dallas Willard says brilliantly, the primary work of God is finding men and women in whom he can entrust his power.
Yes.
And the story of most men is being entrusted with power and it bringing harm to themselves and those under their care. And so this kingdom language is very important. And I believe the central theme for every human being is becoming the kind of king, the kind of queen in whom God is glad to entrust the care of his kingdom.
That's good.
It's well said.
Yeah,
buddy.
man. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.